Welcome back to Sip&Talk.
Great to be here.
Grab your favorite drink, settle in.
Absolutely.
Because today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating and maybe a little unexpected.
Oh, yeah. What are we getting into?
We're talking about knees.
Knees.
Or, well, more specifically, what happens when they hit the ground, culturally speaking.
Ah, okay. Kneeling.
Right, exactly. Our topic today is kind of captured by this phrase, I kneel to you, quite.
Sounds intense.
It does. And look, before anyone jumps to conclusions, we really want to make it super clear. This isn't about judgment.
Right. No negativity here?
Nope. It's purely a cultural deep dive. Think of it like peeking into a different way people express really big emotions or navigate tricky situations, power dynamics, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen some really interesting insights about this. It's a phrase you might hear in China, I kneel to you, okay. Oh, and it's not always literal at all.
That's where it gets really interesting for us, right? The gap between the words and the actions.
Definitely. The layers of meaning are just, oh, wow.
The language and reality of kneeling in China.
Okay, so let's start with that phrase itself. In Chinese, it's grichi.
Grichi ugichi.
Grichi liching.
Which, literally translates to, I kneel to you. Okay. Sounds pretty dramatic, doesn't it?
It really does. But what's so fascinating and kind of surprising is that it's almost never about someone literally, physically dropping to their knees in, everyday chat.
So what is it about, then?
It's more like this intensely emotional expression. It's loaded, feelings of, helplessness, desperation, definitely pleading.
Okay.
And here's the twist. It often has this touch of absurd humor mixed in.
Humor? Really? With kneeling?
Yeah. It's like when you're just completely at your wit's end about something, you throw your hands up and you're like, okay, uncle, you win. Just please cut me some slack.
I get that. Like an exasperated surrender.
Exactly. It's a verbal white flag, a plea for mercy when you feel totally cornered, like you have zero other options left. That's a really powerful distinction. So where might you actually hear this? Give us some everyday examples.
Sure. Okay, so you might see it pop up a lot in online comments. Maybe someone posts something incredibly frustrating or maybe unbelievably clever, and someone comments, I kneel to you. Okay, you win the internet today.
Right, like total defeat or maybe admiration.
Yeah, both.
Yeah.
Or picture a couple having a massive argument. Right, and one person just can't take it anymore. They might dramatically sigh and say it, half serious, half joking, just to end the fight.
Huh. Okay, I can picture that.
And maybe my favorite example is a junior employee who's totally swamped. Their boss gives them another impossible deadline. They might plead, maybe even with a bit of a laugh, D-nail to you, okay, just give me one more day.
So it perfectly captures that mix of genuine desperation, but with a slightly theatrical, almost funny edge sometimes.
Exactly. It's not just pure submission. It's hitting an emotional wall, being utterly done. And this phrase is the ultimate way to signal that.
I've tried everything. I'm out of moves. I give up. I'm spent.
Precisely. It's heavy emotionally, even when there's humor involved.
Okay, so we've got this linguistic, metaphorical kneeling. Now, let's shift gears and talk about actual physical kneeling. This is where the history and the culture really come into play, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because historically in Chinese culture, knees weren't just, for walking around. They were tools for conveying really deep stuff. Loyalty, obedience, sometimes profound shame.
That's a critical point. I mean, you immediately think of ancient China, right? The whole 3 kowtows and 9 prostrations thing in front of the emperor.
Exactly. The kowtow, it wasn't just a little bow. It was this incredibly ritualized act. You kneel 3 separate times, and each time you touch your forehead to the ground 3 times. 9 touches total.
Wow, that's intense.
It was the absolute supreme act of submission, reverence, acknowledging total power. And that history, that image, it really embedded the significance of physical kneeling deep into the cultural psyche.
And you're saying this tradition, it still echoes today in modern life?
It absolutely does, yeah. Though the contexts and the meanings have shifted, sometimes dramatically. For instance, you still see sons kneeling to their parents.
Okay, but what does that signify now?
It's usually a very traditional display of extreme filial piety. That core Confucian value about respecting and obeying your elders.
Right.
So you might see it at really significant moments, weddings, funerals, maybe major festivals like Chinese New Year. It's about showing deep gratitude, asking for blessings, honoring the parents' sacrifices. It's generally seen as a willing, heartfelt act of respect.
Okay, that makes sense. It's voluntary reverence.
But then contrast that sharply with something like employees kneeling to their bosses.
Whoa, that's different.
Completely different vibe. This usually happens in really dire situations. Maybe someone made a massive mistake, missed a huge sales target, a major screw-up at work.
So it's not respect, it's desperation.
Exactly. It's a desperate plea for mercy, for a second chance, for forgiveness when, just saying sorry isn't enough. It really highlights a stark power imbalance where the employee feels completely at the boss's mercy.
And then you mentioned citizens kneeling to officials. That sounds even more intense.
It is. And unfortunately, it happens. Often in these really emotionally charged public scenes, things that make the news, this kind of kneeling is almost always a direct result of a severe power imbalance. It's a last-ditch cry for justice, for help, for intervention, when all the normal channels, the bureaucracy, have failed them.
They've tried everything else.
Everything. And this is all that's left. This traditional, visually powerful, desperate appeal.
So that's the core difference we need to really underline here. Some physical kneeling is about willing respect, like with parents.
Right.
But a lot of it, especially what we see in public life today, comes from feeling utterly powerless. It's a plea made from a position of extreme vulnerability.
Absolutely. And it's amazing how deeply ingrained this visual is, even like humorously or metaphorically. This idea you sometimes hear, like a public figure involved in a scandal should do a live stream apology where they kneel.
Huh. Does that actually happen?
Not always, literally, but the idea that kneeling is the ultimate form of apology, the ultimate sign of remorse or submission, even if it's just talked about as a trope, shows how potent that image is in the culture. It sets the bar for what extreme contrition looks like.
That's a great point. And speaking of humor and how culture embeds these things, let's pivot again. Let's talk about the lighter side. Kneeling in online communities. This sounds kind of fun.
Oh, it totally is. This is where the concept gets flipped and becomes something really creative and, funny. In the digital world, kneeling takes on a whole new meaning.
Like how?
Well, you see it all the time in internet slang. Someone posts an amazing piece of art or a hilarious meme or maybe some incredible Photoshop work, and the comments will be full of stuff like, bro, I kneel, that's amazing, or your comment was so savage, you just gotta kneel.
So it's like saying, wow, you're awesome, I'm totally outmatched.
Exactly. It's definitely a form of exaggerated praise, right? Like saying, I'm not worthy, or you win in English, but with way more drama, more theatrical flair.
You're not literally bowing, but you're so impressed or maybe overwhelmed by someone's skill or their wit or just how bold they are that you verbally surrender, like in admiring defeat.
Yeah, it's a recognition of their mastery.
Yeah.
And it's important. This isn't usually mocking. It's often a mix of like self-deprecation. I could never do that in comedy. It's a modern, evolved way to bow down digitally.
Like a virtual nod of respect full of personality.
Exactly. And often a sense of shared inside humor within that online group. It's like a theatrical tip of the hat to genius or a killer comment.
Okay, so we've looked at the phrase, the literal act, the online version. This begs a deeper question, though. Why? Why is this whole kneeling phenomenon so deeply embedded in Chinese culture? What are the psychological roots?
Yeah, that's where we really need to dig in. And first off, you absolutely cannot talk about this without talking about Confucianism.
Okay, the philosophy.
Right. It's been the bedrock of Chinese society for millennia, and it emphasizes strict social hierarchy, order, knowing your place.
And kneeling fits into that how?
Well, kneeling becomes a physical manifestation of this concept called sil. It's often translated as ritual or propriety or etiquette, but it's deeper than just rules. It's like the cultural grammar for interaction.
The code of conduct.
Exactly. It dictates how you should behave in different relationships, ruler and subject, parent and child, elder and younger. So kneeling becomes this powerful visual way to acknowledge status, show loyalty, even express guilt within that very structured system. It's about maintaining social harmony, even if it means submitting as an individual.
Makes sense. Hierarchy and ritual. What else?
Then there's the pressure that can come from, certain power structures. When people feel like they genuinely cannot resist authority, they can't flip the table, they can't effectively challenge things through normal channels.
Kneeling becomes a strategy.
Yeah, like a desperate strategy for survival. It's a way to try and beg for a lifeline, to de-escalate a situation that feels totally overwhelming and out of their control. It stops being about respect and becomes about perceived necessity.
And that leads to another point, right? Societal pressure. Limited space for Maybe subtle emotional expression.
Exactly. In environments where maybe being too direct or making nuanced verbal arguments might not work or could even be dangerous, kneeling can become this kind of explosive release.
Like a shortcut to being heard.
Sort of. It's dramatic. It's unmistakable. It's a loud cry for help or attention when maybe words alone won't cut through. It's an emotional statement that everyone understands the intensity of, even if they don't agree with it or act on it.
And you mentioned the language itself.
Yeah, finally, it's worth noting that modern Chinese language can be very performative. The way people talk, even about something heavy like kneeling, often have this dramatic theatrical quality. That linguistic style kind of reinforces the idea of expressing big emotions through grand gestures, whether they're verbal like the phrase or physical like the act.
Okay, let's get into some specific real-world examples now. These can be pretty tough, but they really show these forces at work.
Yeah, they do. Picture this scene, and sadly, it's not uncommon. Families, sometimes older folks, literally kneeling in the dirt in front of huge bulldozers.
Oh, man.
They're clutching their property deeds, maybe crying. This happens during forced demolitions. Homes being torn down, often for development projects, sometimes with compensation that people feel is completely unfair.
So they're physically trying to stop it with their bodies.
It's a desperate last resort, putting their bodies on the line, hoping this extreme act might somehow stop the machines, or at least draw public attention to their desperate situation.
And what happens? Does it work?
Often. Tragically, no. What they frequently get is a cold, bureaucratic response like, this is being handled according to law. Yeah. There's this cynical logic you sometimes hear implied. The law is rigid, it's unbending. But you, the person, you're soft, you're pliable. It's a way the system can justify its actions while sort of dismissing the immense human cost.
That's incredibly harsh. Okay, what other examples?
Then you have the petitioners. In Chinese, they're called Ela Zhongfingzi.
What are they?
These are people often from rural areas or smaller cities who travel sometimes hundreds of miles to Beijing or provincial capitals. They're seeking justice for local grievances, maybe land disputes, corruption, unfair treatment, things they feel were ignored or mishandled by their local officials.
So they bypass local authorities and go straight to the top.
That's the idea. And you might see them kneeling outside the central petition offices holding handmade banners, often with just one character written on them.
Yonan.
Injustice. Wrongful suffering. It's a powerful, stark image of desperation and a plea for higher authorities to intervene.
Wow.
And what's even more telling, sometimes they literally have to queue up to kneel. Like they're waiting in line for their turn to perform this act of desperation outside the office.
Waiting in line to kneel, that's chilling.
It really is. It highlights how overwhelmed or maybe ineffective the formal channels have become, forcing people into this traditional, physically demanding, deeply humiliating ritual just to get noticed. It screams systemic failure.
It really does. Any other scenarios?
Yeah, it's not just about land or specific grievances. You also see people kneeling to the police, the Ohian.
Why would someone do that?
Various reasons. Maybe to try and avoid being arrested during a confrontation, or to de-escalate a situation that's getting heated. Sometimes, believe it or not, it's reportedly happened because someone's attitude wasn't considered correct or sufficiently deferential, even when just asking for directions.
Seriously? Just for asking directions?
It sounds bizarre, but it points to this underlying power dynamic. The police aren't just seen as law enforcers. They embody state authority, administrative power, the guardians of social stability.
So the relationship isn't seen as equal?
Often not, no. It's perceived more like they decide, you comply. So when faced with that authority, especially if you feel vulnerable or uncertain, the ingrained response for some might be just kneel. Hope it smooths things over, diffuses the tension.
Wow, okay. And what about people who've, messed up? Scandals, personal issues?
Yeah, that happens too. You see public figures caught in online scandals, or even just ordinary people in, say, a really bad marital dispute, resorting to kneeling.
Is it genuine remorse then?
Sometimes, maybe. But other times it feels very much like performance. Like, okay, I knelt. I did the ultimate act of contrition. Can we all just move on now? Let's sweep this under the rug. It's a way to try to appease the public or the other party quickly.
It sounds like there's almost an informal playbook for apologizing in China.
You could say that. There's this sort of unspoken idea. Admit you did wrong, offer some kind of compensation, and kneel. The cynical take is if you do at least 2 out of those 3, you might just survive the scandal or the conflict.
It's like a damage control tactic.
Yeah, exactly. It's a quick way to try and cut off the tail, escape a bad situation when you can't really argue your way out or control the narrative anymore. It's this complex blend of maybe forced obedience, public humiliation, and just pragmatic survival.
Okay, so stepping back from all these examples, what's the big takeaway here about kneeling in China?
I think the crucial thing is, it's generally not that people want to kneel. It's that the society, through its history, its power structures, its cultural norms, often teaches them, implicitly or explicitly. Being tough, standing your ground, it won't work. Bowing down, showing deference in various ways, that's how you avoid trouble. That's how you might get mercy. That's how you survive.
That's a really important point. So kneeling becomes this kind of ingrained, often desperate compromise.
Yeah, exactly. A compromise for survival. You might hate doing it, but it's perceived, rightly or wrongly, as potentially more effective than arguing or resisting or demanding your rights in certain situations.
So it's wrapped up in emotion, identity, systemic pressure.
Absolutely. It's an expression of intense emotion. It's a tug of war with personal dignity. It's a direct response to feeling powerless against the system. And tragically, it's often the silent language of those who feel they have no other voice.
I won't kneel, a rebellious roar.
Okay, but now let's flip the coin completely. Because alongside all this complex reality of kneeling, there's this other, almost opposite trend happening.
Wow, yeah. It's fascinating. People loudly proclaiming, "Kogi!
Really mean.
I won't kneel."
Okay, so a statement of defiance.
Definitely sounds like it. And this phrase is suddenly everywhere. Online forums, short videos, comments on Weibo, even just in conversations sometimes.
What kind of things are people saying?
You see stuff like, "I, a dignified Chinese person, will never kneel." Or really strong nationalist stuff like, "We, the children of China, would rather die than surrender. We won't kneel to foreigners." The rhetoric gets very dramatic, very patriotic.
Okay, strong words. But here's the kicker.
Right, exactly. Here's where it gets weird, or maybe psychologically interesting. A lot of the time, nobody actually asked them to kneel.
Right. It's like that analogy you used, walking into an empty store and shouting, "I'm not stealing anything, I'm honest."
Precisely. You're left thinking, okay, good for you, but who are you talking to? What prompted this?
So it's like a phantom punch, you called it, a kind of spiritual dialogue happening in their own head.
Yeah, I think that captures it. It's often not actual resistance against a real immediate demand to submit. It feels more like this preemptive, almost defensive surge of nationalist feeling, like flexing a muscle when no one's challenging you. It's a way to feel strong, maybe, without actually facing a fight.
So what's going on underneath? Why this psychological theater? Why declare "I won't kneel" when no one's pushing?
Well, one big reason could be this collective memory, or maybe just a feeling, that people have knelt too much in the past.
Like historically, national humiliations.
Yeah, exactly. That century of humiliation narrative is very powerful. So now, even the slightest hint of external pressure or criticism or perceived slight triggers this fear of being suppressed again. And the immediate reaction is this almost reflexive declaration of loyalty and strength. We might have been weak before, but not now. We won't kneel. It's like a defense mechanism born from historical anxieties.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? Another huge factor, and this is where it often gets tangled up in politics and daily life, is how national pride gets linked to really mundane things.
Like what?
Like consumer choices. Someone wears a Japanese clothing brand or says they like a Korean drama, and suddenly it's not just personal taste. It gets twisted into accusations like you're kneeling to Japan or you're worshiping foreign things.
Wow, really?
Oh, yeah. Or a company shares a news article from, say, the BBC or CNN. The immediate jump for some is, aha, you're kneeling to the American empire. You're a mouthpiece for the West. It turns everyday choices into these high-stakes loyalty tests.
And then there's the really extreme version of that rhetoric.
Totally. If someone dares to support a concept like, say, universal values or free speech or questions a specific government policy, they can instantly get hit with this barrage of labels. You're clearly advocating for Taiwan independence. You're a pro-U.S. kneeling dog.
Yikes. That sounds like a way to just shut down any discussion.
It is. It's incredibly effective, even if it's totally illogical. Shaming and labeling become weapons to enforce conformity and silence dissent.
Is it also possible that maybe some people shouting, "I won't kneel" to one group might actually be kneeling to another?
That's a really insightful point. It's definitely possible. You might have someone loudly, passionately shouting, "I will never kneel to America," down with Western imperialism online. And then, maybe more quietly, In the real life, they're trying very hard to get government subsidies or currying favor with local party officials. It can be a very selective kind of defiance. The public anti-foreign unbowed stance can serve as a kind of cover or maybe a compensation for other forms of deference or pragmatism happening elsewhere.
So this I won't kneel talk.
Yeah.
It's not always straightforward defiance. It often carries a hidden meanings or serves other functions.
Exactly. It functions as a rhetorical tool. So when someone says, I won't kneel to America, what it might actually mean in practice is something like, I refuse to engage with any criticism of our own system, no matter how valid it might be.
Like a mental firewall.
Yeah, a way to just shut down uncomfortable introspection or debate. Or take, I won't kneel to Japanese devils. On the surface, it's patriotic passion. But often it reveals a pretty shallow, maybe propagandized understanding of history, reducing complex relations to a simple emotional slogan.
It's emotion over analysis.
Right. And then there's the one I find particularly ironic. I won't kneel to capitalism.
Said by someone.
Often said by someone who's eagerly buying the latest iPhone, maybe dabbling in U.S. stocks, fully participating in global consumer culture. The gap between the anti-capitalist rhetoric and the actual behavior can be huge. It highlights how performative some of this can be.
And the ultimate deflection tactic.
Oh yeah, the classic, I won't kneel, you guys are the ones who are really kneeling. That's just pure deflection. Trying to win the argument and claim the moral high ground by accusing your accuser of the very thing you're being accused of. It's a way to feel spiritually victorious.
It really does sound like this grand internal drama.
Totally. A kneel or not kneel play where everyone's an actor, the main audience is themselves, and the script is this ingrained narrative of national struggle, victimhood, and perceived external threats. It's more about self-comfort and reinforcing identity than engaging with reality sometimes.
But it's not just individuals saying this, right? This whole I won't kneel idea. It actually became official government policy, almost.
Yeah, that's a really crucial escalation. It moved from being a popular online sentiment to a central theme in official Chinese diplomacy. It became a state-level declaration.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The most prominent one was probably in late April 2025. The Chinese Foreign Ministry released this big bilingual video. It was titled Unbowed, or in Chinese, 狗一不义.
Unbowed.
Okay.
What was it responding to?
It was a very direct pushback against specific international pressures. Primarily, President Trump's huge tariffs on Chinese goods, like that massive 145% tariff threat, and the broader U.S. effort to get other countries to limit their trade and tech ties with China. It was China drawing a line in the sand.
So what was the message? How did they frame it?
The message was incredibly strong, very combative. It called the U.S. tariffs things like a typhoon eye and a fatal trap. It directly accused the U.S. of trying to isolate China economically, to basically strangle its development.
Strong language.
Very. And to make its case, it used historical examples warning other countries. It brought up Japan's experience with U.S. pressure on its semiconductor industry in the 80s, and the Alstom case in France, where a big French company faced U.S. legal action. The message was, see, don't compromise with this hegemon, it won't end well for you.
And the core statement.
The video explicitly declared, and this quote really circulated, China won't kneel, because we deeply understand. Fight for cooperation, and cooperation exists. Compromise for cooperation, and cooperation dies.
Wow. That sounds almost like a threat.
It's incredibly firm, and that, quote, fight for cooperation, compromise for cooperation, and cooperation dies. That's a direct echo of Mao Zedong's thinking, particularly his paper tiger theory, the idea that powerful enemies look scary but are fundamentally weak if you stand up to them. Using that kind of language clearly signaled a no-retreat, absolutely unyielding stance against U.S. pressure.
Were they trying to rally other countries?
Definitely. The video argued that the U.S. share of global trade wasn't actually that big, and that other nations, if they stuck together sailing in the same boat, as it put it, could resist American pressure. And strategically, it also brought up the ongoing case of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, framing her situation as an example of Chinese resilience against foreign bullying. That part was clearly aimed at stirring domestic nationalism while also projecting strength internationally.
So I won't kneel goes from internet slang to official state policy.
Exactly. I won't kneel is the personal, often online cry. China won't kneel became the official government-sanctioned declaration against international pressure. It was a coordinated narrative designed to project unyielding dignity both at home and abroad.
But that kind of strong message, Did everyone think it was a good idea? Was there pushback?
That's the interesting part. No, it wasn't universally praised. Even among observers or experts on international relations, it actually sparked quite a bit of debate about whether it was strategically smart.
Why? That was the criticism?
Well, some foreign policy experts basically called it a diplomatic disaster.
Ouch. Why?
Their argument was pretty compelling. The very act of loudly proclaiming, "we won't kneel," kind of implies that you feel like you're in a position where kneeling is even a possibility. It unintentionally signals weakness or a defensive posture, which is the exact opposite image a rising global power usually wants to project. You don't hear established superpowers constantly saying, "we won't kneel." They just act powerful.
That's a subtle but important point. It assumes a defensive crouch.
Exactly. And outlets like French International Radio, RFI, pointed out another potential issue, referencing Mao-era rhetoric like the paper tiger stuff, while it might resonate with certain domestic audiences.
Might sound different elsewhere.
Yeah. For some international audiences, especially older generations or those familiar with history, it could evoke uncomfortable memories of the Cultural Revolution or earlier periods of intense ideological struggle. So it raised questions about whether that specific propaganda strategy was really suited for a global audience, or if it might actually be counterproductive.
And did it risk alienating potential allies?
That was another concern. The really strong, unyielding, almost aggressive tone, while meant to project resolve, might actually make other countries nervous, especially those caught in the middle, with strong economic ties to both the U.S. and China. Instead of encouraging them to stand tall alongside China, that kind of rhetoric could potentially push them further towards the U.S. side, just seeking stability. It might have backfired in terms of building international solidarity.
This whole discussion, from the personal phrase, "I kneel to you," to the national declaration, "China won't kneel," it really forces us to ask a fundamental question, doesn't it?
Which is?
Who actually has the right, or at least the perceived power, to make someone else kneel?
Yeah, that cuts right to the heart of it. Power, class, hierarchy, and the direction the kneeling usually flows.
Because in societies with big wealth gaps or really rigid structures between officials and citizens, you tend to see a pretty clear pattern, right?
Oh, absolutely. A distinct one-way kneeling mechanism. It's the poor who might kneel to the rich, ordinary citizens who kneel to officials, employees who kneel to bosses. The deference flows downwards.
And you almost never see it go the other way.
Very, very rarely, if ever. I mean, think about it. Does the Communist Party as an institution ever kneel to the people? No. The expectation is consistently the other way around. The people are expected to show loyalty, express gratitude, demonstrate political submission to the party. It's fundamentally top-down.
Which raises that uncomfortable question again. Why does kneeling in China so often seem rooted in this feeling of helplessness under oppression, rather than being a voluntary choice like respect or even protest?
And that ties directly back to the system itself. Does a society provide enough space, enough safe, functional channels for people to actually stand up, to speak their minds without fear, to seek justice through fair and equitable means? When those avenues feel closed off or too risky,
kneeling becomes the desperate, perceived only option.
Exactly. A last resort when standing tall feels impossible or dangerous.
Kneeling in a Three Kingdoms style, global kneeling comparisons.
Okay, let's try to connect a few more dots here. We've talked about kneeling, and we've talked about this "I won't kneel" phenomenon.
Right. That phrase is everywhere.
But here's the paradox that really struck me. Just saying "I won't kneel" doesn't automatically mean you've actually truly stood up. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. It goes back to that empty convenience store analogy, shouting, "I'm not stealing," when no one's accusing you.
Who are you trying to convince? Yourself.
Maybe. Often, it seems like it could be a psychological coping mechanism. When you feel powerless about the actual situation, the real power dynamics, you can't change that reality. So maybe you fantasize that someone is trying to force you to kneel, and then you put on this big performance of "I refuse."
It gives you a sense of control or dignity, even if it's just internal.
Yeah, kind of spiritual victory when a real victory feels out of reach. It's self-comfort, a way to preserve dignity internally when external agency is limited.
And you mentioned another related phrase, something about a firewall.
Oh, right. I don't buy that. You hear this a lot from Chinese netizens online.
What does it mean in this context?
It's often not a reasoned disagreement. It's more like, okay, I don't really understand what you're saying, or maybe it makes me uncomfortable, so I'm just going to label you an enemy or dismiss your point entirely. That makes me feel safer.
So it's like a refusal to engage.
Yeah, often a refusal of critical thinking or genuine dialogue. It prioritizes emotional security and sticking to your existing worldview over potentially difficult truths or complex ideas. It's a way to shut things down quickly.
Okay, with all these complex layers in the Chinese context, maybe it helps to broaden our view. How does kneeling look in other major cultures? Let's do a comparison, like a 3 kingdoms of kneeling.
Huh, I like that. Okay, who are our contenders?
Let's start in the USA. How does kneeling function there? I'd say it's often about kneeling to stand taller.
Interesting way to put it. Explain.
Well, think about it. Kneeling in the U.S. is often a very deliberate, very active choice. It's frequently an act of protest, a statement. The most obvious example is NFL players, like Colin Kaepernick, kneeling during the national anthem.
Right, protesting racial injustice.
Exactly. That wasn't about submitting. It was a powerful, highly visible symbol of dissent. It was meant to grab attention, spark conversation, demand change. It was using the act of kneeling to make a stand.
Okay, protest. What else?
Well, on a totally different emotional register, think about a marriage proposal.
Ah, getting down on one knee.
Right. That's a profound sign of respect, of commitment. It's a voluntary, loving gesture. It's showing vulnerability and making a promise. It's kneeling for someone out of love and respect.
So the underlying language of U.S. kneeling, what does it communicate?
I think it often says something like, I am willing to bow my head now, whether in protest or in love, because I fundamentally believe I have the right and the freedom to stand up, to speak out, or to make this commitment freely. Or, I kneel for you out of respect or love, not because I fear you or because I'm forced to.
So it's an active form of kneeling. It comes from a place of individual agency, strong beliefs, choice.
Exactly. It's about taking a stand, making a statement, expressing a conviction, whether it's political or deeply personal.
Okay, interesting takeaway. In the U.S., kneeling can be a tool for expression, almost a form of empowerment in certain contexts.
Yeah, paradoxical, isn't it? Okay, kingdom number 2, Japan.
Japan. Kneeling there feels different, more ritualized maybe, like an art form almost, especially the dojiza.
Dojiza, tell us about that.
Okay, this is not just getting on your knees. This is full prostration, head pressed literally to the ground, hands flat out, your whole body is lowered, almost like you're becoming dust. It's visually incredibly intense.
And when is this used? This sounds extreme.
It is. You might see it from, say, company executives making a public apology after a massive failure or scandal, or from someone who has committed a really serious social offense and is showing the deepest possible remorse. In manga or anime, characters use it for the most desperate pleas imaginable.
So it's about extreme apology or pleading?
Utter contrition. The language of Japanese kneeling, especially dojiza, seems to convey, I am completely fundamentally wrong. I am willing to make myself utterly low like dust and let you decide my fate. I accept total responsibility.
Is it always forced, or is it a choice?
It feels more like it's not that someone is forcing me to kneel, but the situation, the social rules, my own sense of shame require me to show this level of sincerity and take this level of responsibility to even begin fixing what I broke.
So it's deeply tied into their culture of shame and saving face and social harmony.
Absolutely. It's highly ritualized. The form of the kneel, doing it correctly, showing that utter abasement is often more important than the words spoken. It's about demonstrating publicly how profoundly ashamed and sorry you are as a necessary step to restoring social balance. Reflective takeaway for Japan. Kneeling properly with sincere depth might actually earn you forgiveness or help restore your place in the social order. It's a performance of responsibility.
Okay, powerful. Now back to our third kingdom, China. We've covered a lot of this, but let's crystallize the comparison.
Right, and the contrast is pretty stark. In China, as we discussed often, not kneeling doesn't help you, but even kneeling doesn't guarantee a positive outcome. It's that tragic catch-22.
The examples that stick are the farmers kneeling for their land, parents begging police, petitioners outside government offices.
Yeah, and these are generally not acts of chosen protest like in the U.S. or ritualized apology like in Japan. They feel like acts of raw desperation, born from a perceived total lack of alternatives.
So the language of Chinese kneeling in these public desperate contexts is what?
It's heartbreaking, really. It feels like it's saying, I know the rules are supposed to be fair, but I also know they're not always followed, especially by those in power. So kneeling is all I have left. Or even more fundamentally, I'm not trying to win here. I'm just trying to survive this. Please, just let me survive.
So this is clearly a passive form of kneeling.
Overwhelmingly so in these contexts. a direct result of severe power imbalances, a lack of independent recourse. It's that lowest-cost communication when you feel all other doors are slammed shut and you have no voice that will be listened to otherwise, just a raw plea from powerlessness. So, the poignant takeaway for China. Kneeling often reflects this environment where real agency feels incredibly constrained, pushing people towards postures of profound vulnerability just to appeal for mercy or basic survival.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this three kingdoms comparison. What does the way these societies kneel tell us about them? It seems like it's about expression versus survival, choice versus compulsion.
I think that's a great way to frame it. In the U.S., kneeling is often that conscious individual choice, an expression of protest, respect, love. And crucially, the person kneeling often retains a sense of agency, the ability to still argue or challenge. It comes from a place of perceived rights.
And Japan.
Japan's kneeling, especially dogeza, is deeply tied to shame, taking responsibility, restoring social harmony. It's part of a social code about saving face and performing contrition. It's less about bowing to absolute authority and more about fixing a social breach through ritualized apology.
And China.
In China, particularly in those public desperate situations, it often boils down to survival, pleading from the weak to the overwhelmingly strong, where the powerful party often can't be effectively challenged, and even the act of kneeling might be ignored. It highlights that stark, often unyielding power gap.
So how a society kneels, it's like a mirror.
It really is. It reflects how power is distributed, how individual agency is valued, how dissent is handled, how apologies are made. In places with more freedom, more established channels for voice, kneeling can be active, even empowering. In places where power is concentrated and alternatives are few, it tragically becomes just a posture of survival, bowing your head, hoping for grace.
Conclusion and final thoughts.
Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive, wow, that was a lot. We really want to hammer this home one more time. So our goal here was just cultural exploration.
Absolutely. Purely analysis based on what we've observed and researched. No judgment intended, no hidden derogatory meaning in looking at this complex human behavior.
We just find it fascinating to try and understand all the layers.
Yeah.
From the funny internet memes, I kneel to your Photoshop skills.
Right. All the way to those incredibly serious, often heartbreaking acts of desperation. We talked about the farmers, the petitioners. It's such a wide spectrum.
It really is. And it's particularly interesting, maybe a little unsettling, to think about how, in some contexts in China, the system itself seems to almost prefer, or maybe cultivate, a state of self-kneeling.
What do you mean by self-kneeling?
Well, you touched on it earlier, the idea that the most efficient social control isn't constantly using force.
Right. It's getting people to control themselves, to voluntarily stay silent, internalize the rules, self-censor.
Yeah. People can become, as you said, trained so well that even before authority steps in, they're already apologizing, already assuming a deferential posture, afraid of speaking up or being different. It's like the kneeling happens internally first.
That is a powerful and, kind of chilling thought. When a society can effectively train its citizens to automatically adopt that mental or even physical kneeling posture, it drastically cuts down on the need for overt suppression, becomes a very efficient, if ethically troubling way to manage society.
And this leads us to something really important happening now. China's Gen Z, the younger generation.
Right, because they often explicitly reject that traditional kneeling. They push back against those older forms of conformity.
And this is the key twist, isn't it? They aren't necessarily standing up in the way we might think of active vocal protest either.
Exactly. It's a whole different posture. Many of them have embraced this idea of lying flat.
Jinping? Lying flat. Explain that again.
It's this quiet, passive form of resistance. It's opting out, refusing to participate in the hyper-competitive grind, the crazy 996 work culture, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. meters, 6 days a week, the immense pressure to buy a house, get married, climb the ladder. Instead of fighting the system head-on, they just lie down.
They withdraw. Minimal effort, minimal engagement.
Kind of. It's choosing a simpler, less stressful life. Their mindset often seems to be this resigned pragmatism. Look, I can't change the world, but I'm not going to let the world crush me either. So instead of kneeling to plead or standing up to shout, they just lie quietly, try to survive by lowering expectations and preserving their own well-being.
So the phrase, "I won't kneel," might still be popular. It's a sentiment they might share.
Yeah, the rhetoric is there. But when it comes to the harsh realities, the rigid structures, actual active participation, sustained protest, it often seems less common than maybe just retreating into their phones, engaging digitally, or just focusing on their small personal sphere. The defiant talk doesn't always translate into defiant action in the same way.
Which brings us, I think, to a really profound final thought. Kneeling or not kneeling. It's not just about your body, is it? It's about your mind.
It's a mental posture, absolutely.
You can look like you're standing tall, outwardly defiant. But mentally, maybe you've already knelt. Maybe you've internalized the pressure, stopped questioning, stopped thinking critically.
Or the opposite. You can shout, "I won't kneel," from the rooftops. But if you then spend every evening passively consuming only state-approved news, never challenging the narrative, aren't you kind of kneeling mentally anyway? You're kneeling to the dominant ideology without even realizing it?
So what does true non-kneeling look like then, if it's not just about shouting or physical posture?
Maybe true non-kneeling isn't something you perform loudly at all. Maybe it's quieter. Maybe it's about facing power or facing absurdity, or even just facing the echo chamber of your own beliefs, and still having the courage, persistently, maybe just internally at first, to ask the hard questions.
Right.
Like simply asking why, or is this actually reasonable? Or, crucially, is it okay for me to say no? Can I disagree?
Those fundamental questions.
Yeah. Those are the questions that I think really show you're standing on your own 2 feet mentally, truly engaging with the world, not just accepting things passively, retaining that critical spark. That maybe is the ultimate form of not kneeling.
Wow. That was, a truly eye-opening deep dive. So much to think about there.
Absolutely. It really shows how much complex meaning can be packed into just one word, one gesture, and how wildly different cultures interpret those same things based on their own histories, their own power dynamics.
We really hope you, listening in, enjoyed this exploration as much as we did putting it together.
Yeah, hope it gave you some food for thought.
If you found this deep dive insightful, if it sparked some questions for you, please make sure to subscribe to Sip&Talk wherever you get your podcasts.
Definitely. And hey, don't forget to check out our good friend Micky's YouTube channel. He does some really fun stuff. Memes, music reviews, sometimes wine tasting, travel vlogs.
Oh yeah, Micky's channel is great. Super interesting, lots of variety. You got to go see it. We'll link it in the description.
For sure.
Thanks again for sipping and talking with us today.
It was a pleasure. See you next time.